Warning! This episode contains some strong language. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to Tales from the Trunk, reading the stories that did make it. I'm Hilary B. Bisniaks. Listeners, it is my profound delight to welcome back to the show Juliet Kemp. Juliet, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be back again.
Yeah, absolutely. Listeners, you know, we love a return guest. We absolutely love a return guest, and especially when we are here for a book tour to talk about your new novella, Song, Stone, Scale, Bone. Juliet, is there anything we need to know before we get into this reading?
No, but let's talk. I can maybe talk about it more afterwards, but I'm happy just to start off with, I guess, my Knight Circade, who is the narrator and the protagonist in this. So, yeah. This was all wrong. The duty spot felt familiar. The bench was as comfortable as ever, the blue-grey tiles as smooth under my boots. The road out in front of the chapter house looked exactly as it always had. But it shouldn't. It should be different. And I shouldn't, for my preference, be here at all. But Sir Bellerin had finally decided I'd spent enough time helping him. Hiding in the archives were his exact words, screw him, and put me back on the duty roster. So here I was, watching the spring sun make shadow patterns through the leaves, waiting to see if anyone needed a guide today. It was quiet. The wind rustled the trees and a lark sang somewhere high in the clear blue sky. I glanced over at the rough grey stone of the archive, the oldest part of the chapter house. In there, Bellerin would be at his ceaseless humming, rehearsing old guide songs, creating new ones from information delivered by my knight siblings, teaching them to whoever came by for updates. One of the reasons Bellerin had refused to let me become under-archivist, when I gave up waiting for him to say something and asked flat out, was that my memory might be good enough, and I could cart boxes around with the best of them, but I was no teacher. I'd argued with him. I could do it if I just tried harder, and I so badly wanted just to stay here and let everyone else go off out, though I didn't say that part. But he just smiled understandingly at me, the bastard, and said the thing about hiding. That was that. An hour more till my shift ended. Then, after lunch, I was due in the kitchen gardens out back. I shifted my stiff leather breastplate on my shoulders. If I was lucky, I wasn't going to be lucky. There, coming through the gap in the hedge that led to the red brick building housing the Saal, was the Archon, still upright in her grey robe despite her advancing years, accompanying someone towards my duty spot. I stood and straightened to attention, hand on my sword hilt as they drew near. "Daughter," the Archon said, bowing to me, "your service is required." Bugger. "I serve at the will of Sir Amos," I said. The Archon turned to the woman with her and gestured towards me. "This is Sir Cade, Knight of Sir Amos. She will guide you on your path. Sir Cade, Lady Arel of the family Exeria requires your assistance." "I serve at the will of Sir Amos," I said again, a statement you can't go far wrong with as one of our order, and took a good look at Lady Arel. Her dark hair was tied up in complicated braids that I presumed were this year's aristocratic trend, and her pale skin looked like she never set foot outside her family's compound, rather unlike my own sun-baked look. It would be a lie to say that knights aren't bothered about their appearance. We can be as vain as you like in the right circumstances, but fashionably pale isn't really an option when you make your living riding around guiding people and waving your sword about as necessary. But then there was the very practical shirt and trousers she was wearing. In my previous experience of guiding aristos, practical wasn't a feature. "What is my lady's will?" I prompted her. If I had to do this, I might as well get on with it. "I wish to visit the catacombs," she said, which was unusual. We trained down there, but there weren't many visitors, and hardly ever aristos. But, of course, that was where she wanted to go, because it was precisely the place I absolutely, categorically did not want to go ever again. However, I was still in the order, and an oath was an oath. "Very well, my lady," I said, and ignored the way my stomach turned. "A brief visit, then," the Archon said comfortably. The catacombs were a bare couple of miles from the chapter house. "I wish to go to the mausoleums," Lady Orell said. The Archon looked as surprised as I did. "Ah," I said. I looked sideways at the Archon, but this was my responsibility now. "I am sorry, my lady. The route collapsed 6 months ago." I didn't let myself think about that. "We no longer have a guide song past that point." The Archon nodded in regretful agreement. Lady Orell's chin went up. "You are the Knights of Sir Amos, no?" Yes." "You are obliged to guide?" That was technically true. "Our visitors rarely wish to put themselves in the danger of having no guide song," the Archon said gently. "And yet," Lady Orell said, "in this case I do. Are you refusing to take me?" The Archon looked at me. I could get out of it if I wanted to without dishonour. There was no guide song. The Archon would find someone more comfortable with that risk. But I'd taken an oath. I hadn't wanted to be standing back out here again. I hadn't wanted to leave the quiet safety of the archives. But here I was, standing in this familiar spot as I had so many times before, and I was a Knight of Sir Amos, sworn to guide. "As you will, my lady," I said. "But I don't know the way. No one does." "Then we will find out," she said, "and you will have a guide song for the next person." She smiled at me, but it didn't reach her eyes. Those were determined and worried. What does she want down there anyway? "We will equip you correctly," the Archon said, which ought to go without saying, but I read it as the Archon reminding me she had my back, and it warmed me. "Then let us away," Lady Orell said, and led us briskly back towards the saal and the stores. I trailed behind, wishing I wasn't there at all. I could have done with it taking longer to get kitted up, but we didn't need much. We wouldn't be out overnight, even if we made it past the collapse part. The catacombs were potentially dangerous, but they weren't large. I'd expected to have to sort Lady Orell out with more or less everything. Aristos don't usually think about this stuff. But no, she had knife, flint and steel, a water bottle, some wrapped bread, and a thin blanket, all tucked into a neat haversack. I took a little more, rope for starters, and more in the way of weaponry. But then I was supposed to be the one doing the carrying. We both bowed our heads for the Archon to bless us, and set off down the path towards the catacomb's entrance. She was striding out swiftly, like she was in a hurry, shoulders back, not slumping under the weight of her bag. I eyed her sideways. All in all, I was curious about Lady Orell. Her clothes were good quality, but practical. She'd packed a perfectly sensible kit bag, and she wanted to go poke around the catacombs, which wasn't a customary aristocratic sport. It interested me, despite myself. Foolish. Doesn't do to get too interested in clients. Do what you're told, stick your sword in whatever needs a sword stuck in it, get it. That's what Graf always reckoned. She caught me looking and gave me a brief quarter smile. "Sir Cade," she said. "Lady Orell," I said. I wanted to ask what was so important that she didn't care there wasn't a guide song, but that wasn't my business. Our oath covers guiding, not judging the value of the trip. It doesn't stop you being curious. "Have you been to the catacombs before?" she asked. I snorted. "Of course, we all have. We trained down there. I mean, it's convenient, right?" "Train to navigate?" "First song any of us learn," I said. "Half a song now, and it's good combat practice." "Combat practice?" I glanced over again. Her eyes were wide. I rolled mine. "Did you think we'd just happily skip through there with nothing to bother us? Why do you think I have this bloody big sword? I've taken an oath to guide people, not to be polite to them, which is handy because I'm all right at guiding, but not much good at being polite." "You are a knight," she said stiffly. "Of course you would have a sword." "Fair. Well, I might need it. Minotaurs, Karoths. You have encountered them before?" "First time I went down, I was a novice," I said. "They send a few proper knights down with you, in case anyone gets stuck on song, and to whack the beasties if need be. My Graf," I hope she'd missed the hiccup, "was determined we wouldn't need any help. We did pretty well to start with, saw off a swarm of minotaurs." I saw Graf's exultant face in my mind's eye. He'd been barely old enough to shave. Graf wanted to find a carroth. I figured I would just as soon not. We were arguing about it when the biggest spider I've ever seen dropped straight down onto his nose. Never heard anyone scream like it. He belted straight back the way we'd come, and I scrambled after him because we'd been told to stick together no matter what. Every proper knight in the place heard him and came running too, and they all clattered into each other at a crossroads like something out of a farce play. I grinned. He got latrine duty for a month, and I got it with him because he was my sword brother, but I couldn't get that out. Because apparently I should have stopped him. Don't know how. He was twice the size of me back then. I got my growth spurt late, and Graf was always a big lad. Lady Orell was smiling, properly this time. I hope you made him pay for it. Been a joke between us ever since, I said. Had been. And there was the entrance. I gestured. Here we are. Onwards, my lady. And that is the end of that scene.
Oh, delightful. Absolutely delightful. Yeah. Love a snarky knight.
I very much enjoyed writing Kate. And yes, we'll find out more about Graf, her sword brother, who is dead but might not be altogether gone.
You have me hooked.
Glad to hear it.
Oh, so of course this is Tales from the Trunk. So the first thing I have to ask is there anything that just didn't quite make it into the final draft of this that you're just super sad about or regretful or otherwise really wish could have made it in?
I was thinking about this. There's nothing kind of large, I think, that I cut. There was a bit where I wanted to include Cade's family that she hasn't seen for a long time because she's been a knight. In an early draft, they ran into in a later stage after they've gone through the catacombs and come out and more shenanigans have ensued. They ran into Cade's family, and I had to cut that because it didn't. I'd have needed to write a whole another bit of book to make that tie in properly to make it worthwhile. And this is a novella, which has a fairly strict word limit.
Yeah.
As it was, I spent an awful lot of time. So having cut that, and the farm that they fetch up in is no longer Cade's family's farm. I also spent a lot of time cutting just a lot of very small bits because I wanted to keep it under 40,000 words. And it comes out, I think, at something like 39,500 in the end.
Yeah, squeaked it right in.
Squeaked it in, but most of that was just, tightening things up a little bit by little. The one thing that's in there, but isn't overtly in there, because, and I still don't think there's a way of making this overt by definition, is that part of my world building is that this world has no written language.
Oh, wow.
Which is why you have the guides who learn the guide songs to guide people, but they don't have any written language. And of course, there are cultures in this world that don't have those sorts of written language and have an oral tradition and all that. But the thing is, if you've got a first-person narrator, they don't know that,
right?
Because it's not part of their world,
right? So it's just normal for them.
Yeah. So it's not that it's not in there; it is in there, but there's no way of writing it explicitly that I could think of with a first-person narrator.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, we on the episode, the last episode that would be in the feed that just came out yesterday as we're recording this, with Josh Story, we were talking a bit about the tendency to want to put everything in, and kind of the differances in focus there.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think especially in a first draft, I anyway tend to sort of shove lots of things in as they occur to me.
Oh yeah.
Even when I've got a plan, which I'm trying to do more, because then I'm less likely to get stuck 20,000 words in. But I suddenly I have ideas. And I'm like, oh, this could be here. Like, this farm could be Cade's family's farm, and there could be a whole thing with her brother, and it's all very complicated. And then I go back and I'm like, yeah, but if you do that, it's kind of got to pay off.
Mm-hmm.
So either I write something more, or I cut it.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's what a first draft is for, kind of for myself anyway. It is. I often am a kitchen sink drafter, and then realize like, oh, this doesn't actually pay off in any real way, or this doesn't actually land at all outside of my brain.
But the flip side of that, I think, is when you've thrown all these things in, and then you get, to the end or towards the end, and you're like, hang on, that thing that I chucked in chapter 2, off the cuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm gonna come back to, which is going to be the crucial. So if you let yourself throw all these things in, some of them have to go, but some of them turn out to be the crucial idea that will make the whole thing tie together.
Love that.
So,
absolutely love that. So without giving too much away, is there any part of this book that you're just super excited for people to get to?
I think it's not really a spoiler because it happens very early on. Graf, Cade's dead sword brother, is going to end up haunting her.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved that because I loved writing their relationship. Basically, they're kind of this very deep bond, and Cade's very strong sense of responsibility about what happened, which I won't say more about. And the kind of Graf's a much more sort of practical sort of person with a much less sense of responsibility, and the way they interact, I just really enjoyed writing that. That's probably my favourite thing. I also like the dragon.
Oh yeah,
who is also going to show up in the first couple of chapters.
Love the dragon,
and winds up inviting himself along on the later kind of part of the quest, and it's very hard to say no to a dragon.
Yeah. Thinking about the two ends of the spectrum of literary dragon that my brain immediately filled in, and both of them, it's on the one hand we've got the Enchanted Forest Chronicles by Patricia C. Wrede, and like the Dragon Kazul being a very you're not going to rescue the princess from me because she came here of her own accord, and we're friends actually. And on the other hand, the dragon from Wizard of Earthsea, who is also a very powerful personality, shall we say?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I wouldn't argue with a dragon who wanted to invite themselves along on my quest.
Problem is, then you have to try and feed them, which is a bit more challenging.
Yeah. Very rude of them that they invite themselves along and then don't actually provide anything for themselves.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the problem is that your dragon could go off and provide things for themselves, but then you might get into trouble from everyone on the nearby.
Yeah. They are their own dragon, but also, in the eyes of the law, perhaps they are your responsibility. Yeah.
And in terms of things that I'm excited for people to get to, there is a point where the dragon accidentally rescues everyone, which I also very much enjoyed writing because it's an extremely chaotic scene, which winds up with Cade screaming her head off as she's dragged through the air.
Oh, I love this.
Very embarrassing. Very embarrassing when you're supposed to be, a robust and stoic knight.
Oh, lovely. Oh. Well, again, that is Song, Stone, Scale, Bone, which is available right this very moment, listeners, and you should buy it.
Please do.
Juliet, do you have anything else, before we sort of wrap things up, do you have anything else that you'd love for our listeners to know about, perhaps, that you have written, maybe a series?
Yes, I finished earlier this year. I released the last book of my Marek series, which is a sort of fantasy city political series with magic and complicated family relationships, and a bit of a revolution in the last one. And in fact, I talked to you about this time last year. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, that's the other thing that I've finished relatively recently. It feels, I have to say, the last book feels both like, oh yeah, I only just finished writing that, and about 4 billion years ago at the same time. But it came out in January. Is that
Yeah.
recent or is that 4 billion years ago? I leave it to you to decide.
Who knows? Time is fake.
Um,
Time is.
but that was a lot of fun to write to wrap up that series, and to say goodbye to the characters that I've been sort of writing about since 2018, which is definitely quite a while ago.
Yeah.
So I'm told that you can start with the fourth book. So if anyone's curious, you can just pick up The City Revealed, which was the final book, and there's enough in the first chapter or so to get you caught up.
I would, however...
Or you could read all of them. I mean, people could also read all of them. I'm obviously very much here for that.
Dear listeners, I would recommend buying all 4 books. On the subject of things that we're excited about, also, is there anything that you've been enjoying in the wider media landscape recently that you'd love our listeners to know about?
Ooh, I've been watching Deadlock,
Nice.
Australian. It's an Australian kind of detective murder mystery thing, stroke odd couple comedy, stroke like other sorts of black humor, workplace comedy. Maybe it's lots of things all wrapped up in one, and it's very queer, wall to wall lesbians.
We love that.
And Madeleine Sami, who played Archie in the second season of Our Flag Means Death, is Eddie, one of the kind of odd couple buddy, cop buddies.
Fantastic.
Being extremely foul-mouthed, I think that's fair, and tactless, and just generally awesome, as Dulcie, her colleague, sort of goes around trying to make her behave. Anyway, I've absolutely loved that. And I also finally, I'm very late to this one. I just finished reading Freya Marsk's trilogy. The Last Binding's the trilogy name, isn't it? A Marvelous Light is the first one, and then I can't remember the names of the second two. The first one came out ages ago, like several years now, and I've been meaning to read it for apparently several years. And I just got round to it on holiday this week, and then golloped up that and the rest of the trilogy in about a day and a half, basically. I'd said to myself, I'll try the first one, and then when the book budget allows, I will. No, grump, grump, grump. Great, really thoroughly enjoyed it. Sort of Edwardian alternate universe magic stuff.
Yeah.
Also quite queer.
Listeners, if you're interested in a bit more of a pitch on that from Freya,
cool.
You should check out her episode. It was not a book tour, but she came on in October of 2021, I want to say, is when A Marvelous Light came out. And would highly recommend, obviously, listening to every episode in the backlog, but if you want a starting place right now, I would say that would be a good one. Also, listening back to this time last year when Juliet was on. Juliet, it's been such a pleasure having you on the show. Before we get going, finally, where else can our listeners find you?
I have a website at julietkemp.com, and you can sign up to my newsletter there as well. And I'm still sort of on Twitter at Juliet K, and I'm on Blue Sky. Fairly sure that's Juliet K as well. And Mastodon, Zirkus/Juliet. I'm finding it difficult to remember because there's quite a lot of these things now. I haven't really adjusted to this new social media landscape.
Of course, yeah. Well, links, of course, will be in the show notes. I
was going to say that's probably a better way to do it.
Yeah. Well, Juliet, thank you again so much for being on the show. It's been such a pleasure, and I can't wait for your next project and to have you back for another book tour.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely to chat.
Absolutely. Tales from the Trunk is mixed and produced in beautiful Oakland, California. Our theme music is Paper Wings by Lillian Boyd. You can support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/trunkcast. All patrons of the show now get a sticker and logo button, along with show outtakes and other content that can't be found anywhere else. You can find the show on Blue Sky at Trunkcast, and I post at HBBisnieks. If you like the show, consider taking a moment to rate and review us on your preferred podcast platform. And remember, don't self-reject.